Tuesday, January the 21st. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Calling the roll, Mr. Germana. Here. Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Schron.
He's here somewhere. Oh, okay.
Ms. Conwell. Here. Mr. Jones. Here. Mr. Rogers. Here. Ms. Simon. Here. Mr. Greenspan. Here. Mr. Miller. Here. Mr. Brady. Here. Ms. Conley.
Here.
There is a quorum.
All right, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. For a silent meditation, we all ask that everyone reflect on their own personal meditation for the evening. All right, moving on to item 5, public comment related to the agenda. I guess we've been through all the public comment. Is there anyone else that has a public comment related to the agenda that they'd like to speak on?
Yes, Madam
Okay.
President. Michael Burns.
Burns?
Good evening, Madam President and members of council. My name is Mike Burns. I'm the Senior Vice President of Convention Sales and Services for Positivity Cleveland, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak today. I would like to lend my support and the support of Positivity Cleveland behind the extension of the tax on alcohol and tobacco that supports our sports facilities, otherwise known as the sin tax. In my work, I help attract conventions to Northeast Ohio. I can tell you that convention decision makers give strong consideration to facilities such as our sports facilities that we're blessed to have in our city. And to have them within walking distance is even a greater benefit to what we have to offer. Making sure these facilities are current and maintained to provide a first-class experience to our visitors is paramount. And these visitors are numerous. Our sports facilities attract more than 4 million attendees every year. More than half of these people live elsewhere, but events at these facilities bring them into Cuyahoga County where they support our local businesses. These visitors drive significant economic impact to our community and result in significant dollars to the overall community. In addition, all these facilities are very important to attracting convention business into our market. In fact, we can and do compete for some convention events that need facilities like Quicken Loans, First Energy, and Progressive Field. And oftentimes my team, you'll see them taking customers considering our city to all these venues when they're making decisions to come into our market to bring in large national conventions. The opportunity to attract these events to our city has never been greater. With the recent addition of the convention center and the numerous hotels coming online that we've all heard about, the role of our sports facilities as visitor experiences, as well as facilities themselves to attract the meetings, has never been greater to our community. These facilities are much more than places where our sports teams play. They're public assets that anchor our neighborhoods, create significant economic impact, and it helps attract millions of people to our region, both directly for games and events, and indirectly by helping us attract conventions and meetings. This issue ensures that we will keep these facilities up to date and well maintained into the future, and it does this without raising taxes. I ask County Council to please consider the substantial benefits to our community and vote to place this on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns.
The next speaker is Josh Demankos.
Okay, do you have something new to say?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I knew that would
I
be
thought
a
you might.
question. And once again, I'd like to thank you for an opportunity to speak. Clearly, I've already stated that I oppose placing this on the ballot. However, if that is not achievable, I ask that you please delay placing this on the ballot. Whether it's going to be on the ballot in this election cycle or a future one, I would ask that this being placed on the ballot is delayed until we get more specific information regarding the expected costs of these improvements and maintenance procedures in a line item fashion. Additionally, I would like you to delay placing this on the ballot until we find out what jobs, if any, other than construction will be created if this tax is extended. And finally, what life expectancy or usable service life these improvements have. I would like this to not be placed on the ballot, but if you are unwilling to refuse to place it on the ballot, I ask that you delay it until these issues are addressed. Thank you.
Thank you for the input. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, there is one other speaker, but they have requested to do it at the end of the meeting.
Okay. I just want to point out that, reiterate that council's role in this is to make a decision as to whether or not to place this on the ballot to allow the voters to make a decision. And we have many council people here with many questions that we'll be getting to in just a minute. But we will be having another committee meeting of the whole on January the 23rd, which is Thursday. And then we'll be back at another committee of the whole and a public hearing on Tuesday the 28th, and our regular meeting on Tuesday the 28th. So there's ample opportunity, and we entertain emails, letters, phone calls, and from citizens who wish to have their input in any way. And we can skip item 7 since Mr. Fitzgerald is not here for a message from the county executive, and move on to item 8. Is there anything else from the administration, Mr. Carroll, the chief of staff, or anyone? Okay, go ahead.
Resolution number 2014-0002, a resolution determining to submit to the electors the question of levying an extension of the alcohol and cigarette excise taxes for the purpose of paying the costs of constructing, renovating, improving, or repairing sports facilities and reimbursing a county for costs incurred by the county in the construction of sports facilities.
This is second reading, so we don't need a motion, we just have discussion. Just discussion, okay. All right, I know Mr. Brady had asked to start with a question, so Mr. Brady, and then we'll go down the list.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I have a lot of questions. I'm sure others do as well. I'm only going to ask one or to start with because I'm sure there will be some of the same questions from other people. And I know we're also going to continue this on Thursday. The council president had mentioned or had stated that the minimal duty that the council has here is to decide whether to put this on the ballot in the May primary. But what I'd like to ask, because I think it would be good for the public and even maybe for some of the council members, but definitely is something the public should understand. And I'd like to ask this question of Mr. Roman, and it's sort of kind of how did we get here? I mean, we know in the big picture how we got here, but there were specific logistics to how we arrived here today, and I know you were very much involved in that, and I'd like you to edify the public and
Sure.
the council.
Sure, Councilman, and to others. I think what you're referring to, Councilman Brady, is the fact that when we had the ability to extend this tax in 1995, which was the second vote, it was to expire in 2015, obviously, 20 years later. But we needed the state to give us enabling legislation in order to extend that tax again. And that's what we were able to achieve last year by working with the state legislature. We were able to get the legislation that we needed to, in fact, for Cuyahoga County only, to put this before the voters based on your decision to extend the tax up to 20 years once again. So we're here today because the state gave us that authority, but obviously only if you, on behalf of the residents of the county, determined that it should go on the ballot, and in this case, in May of this year. I do think it's important to point out, though, and I missed this in my opening comments, when we did the sin tax, as it's been referred to, in 1990, going back to 1989, there was a lot of concern from predecessors of yours, sitting in various legislative bodies and the public and so forth, to see if there was a possibility to get a tax that in fact would tax people beyond just Cuyahoga County. Because we all know, and you've heard today, that there are 75 million people that have visited these facilities and they haven't all been from Cuyahoga County. In fact, the mechanism to do that does not exist. As you know, each county is treated very distinctly, and we now are one of only 2 counties that thankfully have the kind of government that we have. But there wasn't a mechanism for 2, 3, 4, or 5 counties to do that and to pool their proceeds through a tax of this type. I think what we landed on, though, and I think this is important, what we landed on was a tax that's, as been stated, hasn't gone up over time. In fact, the real value has gone down. But many people who don't live in Cuyahoga County have contributed to that pool. Every time someone comes to a sporting event, a Playhouse Square event, anytime somebody from Lorain County goes to Crocker Park, or somebody from Lake County comes into Euclid, anytime a person from any county in the state, any state in the country, or any country in the world comes here to partake of what Cleveland has to offer, they're contributing to this tax. And with your help, we can take to the voters the opportunity to do that again. Does that get to your question, Councilman?
Yes,
Okay.
I wanted people to clearly understand there was a background to how we got here, and that's my first question.
All right, Mr. Schrein?
Thank you. I just won't be quite reserved to one question. I did appreciate the comments about slide, I think, Mr. Komorowski's slide number 18, and Schleman's slide number 42, which were the repairs, and would like to get at some point along the way the identification, because I think it's very relevant. If you're going to buy a roof, what does a roof cost? And so there's certain expectations. I think the public has the right to have an idea as far as those kind of things, and so they can have a frame of reference. My appreciation is also they would anticipate after 20 years, we all are many of us are homeowners, know that at 20 years a roof does need to be repaired. So it's very relevant, it's very real, it's very tangible, and I think it's very understandable. So it would not be, I think, a very complicated process, whether it's at 22 years or 24 years or at 19 years. I think that's very relevant. My questions, though, are again, like my colleagues, how did we get here on a few of these items? It would be very logical in 1994 to have a maintenance program and plan scheduled and forecasted. Mr. Roman, do you know how that was forecasted at the time as far as what is being built into the operating budgets for maintenance? Was that being built in, or let's see. Mr. Oppenheimer, yeah, I assume there's got to be, when you're building a budget, you should be building a capital CapEx budget and all those other components. So I assume that someplace in there is this number being calculated.
Yes, Madam President, to the councilman, the original leases set forth a rental formula. The leases also set forth an annual capital repair deposit mechanism that was driven off of the original rental formulas. And as I said, as time went by, and particularly in the post 9/11 time, when it was much more difficult because rent from the Indians and the Cavs started to decline a bit. It was difficult for Gateway to meet its obligations, including making contributions to the capital repair funds. So we found ourselves with an inability to set aside needed resources at the time to build ongoing capital repair funds.
So that was a red flag, obviously, at that point in time, that we were going to have a maintenance issue that was going to start to
That's
grow
correct.
as a problem if we didn't do something about it. Okay.
That's correct.
Right, but it was budgeted, it was forecasted. We just were not able to, with the way the structure was put together, able to put the money into the maintenance. Is that what we're telling us?
That's correct.
Because attendance was dropping and things of that nature.
That's
Okay.
correct.
How did we come up with this $500,000 number that was being defined as a threshold? Why wasn't it 250? Why isn't it $1 million?
Madam President, the councilman, again, as you can probably appreciate, there were extensive negotiations at the time between Gateway and the Indians and Gateway and the Cavaliers. And $500,000 was identified as a negotiated threshold for any individual item. And it's important to note in the respective leases, it is identified as any individual item. As we got to the point in time where major items were going to arise in older buildings that suffered the wear and tear of many patrons coming through them, $500,000 was a negotiated number.
Okay, and you saw the presentations, slide, I think 14 and slide, or 20, 42 and 18, where the list of items were on there. How many of those do you think will fall above the $500,000 number? Do you have any idea based on you being our steward for maintaining our facilities?
To the councilman, we've not received, one thing I should note, we've not received any specific requests from either the Indians or the Cavaliers with regard to major capital items yet. We saw the lists with the ranges of estimates as you did. We would expect, and this is why why as a board, we established a process. We would expect to examine every individual request that comes from the teams, alternatives that they researched with regard to implementing those alternatives, the cost, and with our consultant, Middo Incorporated, evaluate them and see if they meet the test.
Okay, and being our steward of the facility, will these extend the life, maintain the life? What is your best, you're our eyes and ears for our county in regards to this. What do you think that this list over that 10 years will do for the length of the building?
I think certainly replacing or repairing items that were on those lists would extend the useful life of the facilities. As you might imagine, there are many pretty sophisticated mechanical systems in these buildings. They're large buildings, and without addressing those needs, I think the useful life would be much shorter than if they are addressed.
Would you have anticipated that a scoreboard would be part of that also? Is that a useful life item that goes through? I know I was involved with school boards, and our scoreboards, as a microcosm of it, would fail at some points and need to be replaced and be restored as part of the experience for that. Is that something you would have categorized back in 1994 as an item of maintenance?
Yes, sir. Those are identified as scoreboards. Are identified as capital repairs in the original leases, which date to 1991. They continue to this day to be an item listed in among the capital repair items in the respective leases.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Simon is next, but I just wanted to remind everyone that you have a parking ticket in Huntington Garage. The clerk can validate it for you so that you do get free parking. Right. Ms. Simon?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up with the first question posed by Councilman Brady to Joe Roman about the process which got us here. I understand that there was an extension granted by the state legislature, but is that a one-time shot? For example, if this council decides hypothetically to only have a duration of the tax for 10 years, would it require another grant by the state to extend it another time? Or is this always going to be an ongoing opportunity to extend the tax?
That's a good question. I think it would give us the ability to do it for the full 20 years in whatever increments, but I'm not absolutely positive we can get that answer for you.
And after 20?
I think we would need to go back again.
Okay. Madam Chair, I need some clarification on the Gateway agreement with the city and the county, I guess.
Mr. Oftemer?
I just want to understand, looking at your slide in your presentation, does Gateway own the property as well as the facilities? Is it actual title deed, or is it by contract that you have control over those?
Gateway owns the land, the 28 acres of the site. Gateway owns the facilities. There's an agreement, which is one of the foundational Gateway agreements that dates back probably to 1990. It's creatively referred to as the three-party agreement between Gateway, the county, and the city. Generally, although there are nuances, the three-party agreement sets forth that at the termination of the Indians lease, the baseball park and the accompanying land are turned over to the city of Cleveland. The arena and the accompanying land revert to Cuyahoga County. until, or so long as the leases are in force, Gateway is the owner of the facilities. One of the nuances is that in line with the 1992 through 1994 financing arrangements with the county, that the county does have a mortgage on the site, and the county has certain powers with regard to managing the site in Gateway's stead if it so chose. But specifically, Gateway is the owner of the facilities on behalf of the city and the county. And when the respective leases expire, the ballpark reverts to the city and the arena reverts to the county.
And what's the term of the contract among the entities?
Madam President, the Councilwoman, the Indians lease currently expires by its terms on December, I think it's December 31st of 2023. Cavs, same date, 2027. However, they each have 3 5-year options to extend the lease if they so choose.
So by operation of law, then, when the leases expire with the teams, then therefore the contract that's signed by the 3 entities is automatically expired as well. My question was about the contract that exists among the city, the county, and Gateway.
That would be the case, yes.
And if you run into a situation again where there's not enough money to fund the maintenance of the facilities, you described that during a recession time, and this for some reason doesn't get on the ballot, and there's no funding coming from the residents, the tax, what then would happen?
Councilwoman Simon, plainly, I think, from Gateway's perspective, we would continue to execute our policies and procedures as I laid them out, take requests from the team. After the process runs its course, we would present those respective requests by the teams to the city and the county. If there was no funding provided to execute those repairs, the teams have the ability, if they choose, to execute them themselves. But as they are leases, they're contracts, it is ultimately the obligation of Gateway during the terms of the lease to fund those. And if Gateway doesn't fund them, then the teams would have recourse as set forth in the lease.
They probably could get out of it.
They probably could get out of it.
Right. Okay. And one more quick question. I don't want to dominate. I want to be clear that the piece of legislation we have does not dictate how the funds are going to be allocated. If maybe this is not a question for you in particular, but there's nothing in front of this council right now to determine how the funds are going to be allocated, and that's something the council needs to address if this goes onto the ballot or before.
Yes.
Either one.
It's on our radar screen. We haven't got to that point, but everybody's kind of aware of that. I have Mr. Miller, Conwell, Rogers, Jermaine, and Greenspan.
Madam President, if I may just very quickly for clarity of the record, the last opportunity for this tax to go into effect is it has to be put on the ballot and voted upon by September 1, 2015. After that, the right to put it on vanishes. You need state action again to be able to put it on the ballot.
Okay, Mr. Miller?
Thank you, and I'd like to
Special election.
follow right where Ms. Simon left off, and we're getting these compilations of things that need to be done, and at some point there's going to need to be processes. Number one, to prioritize them, and number two, to allocate how much of the money goes to repairs for which of the stadiums, and I would like to hear from any of the presenters that's willing to take this on, their vision of how they would envision that occurring.
If I may, Madam President, just quickly before, just to clarify the process in terms of what happens. The legislation that is before you is simply placing the question before the voters to decide whether the tax should be levied. It does not obligate any money to any of the stadiums. That happens through a separate cooperative agreement that's entered into, and that agreement will come back before County Council and it will be voted upon. So I just wanted to clarify that there is an agreement that happens as well that will be before Council again. The vote, even if the voters pass this, it doesn't obligate any of the expenditures at that point.
All right, let me just make this clear. So if we vote to put it on the ballot, and if the voters vote for the tax, then there will be a pool of money created, and an agreement will be made between the three teams, which would have to come back to this council to approve, and that agreement would say third, or whatever the breakdown would be.
That's essentially the one issue is the
Okay.
Browns is the agreement would be effectively between us and Gateway and between us and the city if the Browns are affected by it.
Okay.
But yes, there would be a separate agreement that will come before County Council for vote. This is simply placing the issue of the taxes before the voters.
So we could accept or reject that agreement. And that's Mr. Miller's concern
time.
about how the money is going, which is a very important question and one of my major concerns, how the money will be allocated.
Exactly. And August 1, 2015 is the deadline, is the date when the taxes will start getting collected, not necessarily when the date that the taxes start being spent. So that will be decided in the cooperative agreement when the expenditures happen and to who they go.
All right, I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. Did I usurp
Okay,
your question?
so I would like to hear an initial shot from Gateway and from the Browns as to what they would envision that process looking like.
Madam President, to the councilman, from Gateway's perspective, working within the confines of a cooperative agreement that would be in place between the city and the county, I suspect that there would be an amount allotted to the Gateway facilities. Within the confines of that dollar amount, again, from Gateway's perspective, our board has already approved these policies and procedures, which in essence evaluate the applicability of the individual repair and by definition would prioritize it. So if there happens to be money available as provided by this revenue stream, perhaps, and then again, analyzing the impact of a cooperative agreement between the city and the county, we would go through our process at Gateway, submit whatever Gateway suggests should be executed to the city and the county. At that point, we believe it would probably become a function of the cooperative agreement to either fund it or not.
Okay. Yes, I would like to hear a response from the Browns on the same question. Okay.
Through the council president to Councilman Miller, because Mr. Oftermatt is the landlord for the Cavs and Indians, I think it's appropriate that I address your
That's
question
fine.
as the landlord to the Browns. And in that case, what we would anticipate is that there would be an agreement that would specify the portion that is allocable to First Energy Stadium would come to the city of Cleveland and then would be spent as we spend our capital repair monies today. There are procedures set forth in the lease that govern when a request is made, how it's processed, and how the public improvements are made. And these are the means by which, for example, we ensure that our ordinances, including community benefit elements, are achieved.
Okay. And one further question for Gateway. The Browns announced a program where they're proposing that they would pay a portion of the cost of some major improvements, particularly scoreboards. And my question is whether you anticipate anything like that happening with the Gateway facilities, or do you expect that the 500,000 or so rule per individual item would continue to be the way this is handled?
Madam President, Councilman Miller, we would utilize our process. Our process is designed to evaluate the nature and the extent of what we call major capital, which is the amount greater than $500,000. I suspect that there will be times when we agree with our tenants as to what meets the $500,000 threshold, and I suspect there will be times when we do not. Both the Indians and the Cavs today made note of, and I think correctly, and I agree wholeheartedly that our level of collaboration has been wonderful over the years. The Cavs and the Indians have been great partners and contribute a lot to the community. But we have every member of our board at Gateway sees it as their duty to carefully analyze these major capital items as they come in through our staff and our consultant. And we may disagree with the teams from time to time and negotiate a solution.
And just to follow up, would it be Gateway's expectation that a major capital repair that would be more of an extra as opposed to basic maintenance, that the teams would pay for that rather than Gateway or the Syntax?
To the councilman, as has been the case in the leases since 1991, and each one of the teams referred to it in their presentations, Gateway's obligation to make or to execute and fund capital repairs, $500,000 or not, are to be consistent with the initial scope of the design of each of the structures. Improvements, as opposed to repairs, by definition, we feel would be beyond the scope of the initial design, and that would be the responsibility of the respective teams. And each one of them has executed those kinds of improvements to the facility over the years.
Okay, thank you.
And next is Ms. Conwell. I would just like to point out that Matt Carroll sits on the Gateway board for the county.
Yes, through the chair, I'm just going to call up the individuals I put their names at. I have a list, but I'll just do three. Mr. Oftermatt, you spoke to the cost of $50 million spent so far for the Cavaliers and Indians for repairs. Could you provide us with what was your profits? What was the profit margin?
Those were actual items that they paid to either repair or replace components of the building.
Right.
So as far as I know, the only profit margin would have been to the suppliers of whatever materials there were.
So you're saying Gateway paid $50 million?
The teams paid $50 million as, and that's done
as
via rent paid.
So say 25 each. And
it's a little bit different than that.
Okay. Well, I'm just,
the breakout is roughly 16 million Indians and 34 million Cavaliers.
Okay. So
And
both of
that's the
those
period
teams, I'm
from-
assuming, made some profits. Even though they spent out 50 million for repairs, they made a profit or they wouldn't keep doing it.
I would
Do you know
I would
that
assume the
profit?
same thing. However, I don't know what that profit is. That's not within our purview at Gateway.
Okay. Is there a way that you can get that information to county council?
You can ask the teams. Our leases do not provide for us to access that information as they're private entities.
Indians and Cavs, do you want to answer that? Do you know that amount?
Madam President and Councilman Conwell, I'm not sure what the question is. Are you saying, do you want to know what we make every year?
What's your profit?
Well, we have, we have audited financials, but we run a private company, so we're not required with the Gateway lease in order to provide that information. I can tell you that the Cleveland Indians did not make money last year. Our financials will be out in March. So I don't know, in the context, I don't quite understand how I could give you any information other than the fact that if we had $16 million that we would spend in 2013, would we have made a profit? And the answer is no, because we lost money in 2013.
Okay, you're from the Indians?
Yes, ma'am.
Would the Cavaliers like to answer that?
Sure, and Madam President, through to the Councilwoman. First of all, I think just maybe I understand the first part of your question, which was relative to the investments the teams have made. And as Mr. Oftermatt referenced, he was referenced from a period of 2004, so not even previous to that. But I think just speaking from a Cavaliers perspective in Quicken Loans Arena, we have made any number of investments in the arena in our effort to try to keep it competitive. And that's related to capital repairs, that's related to repair and maintenance, and then ultimately even with the agreement that we struck in 2004 relative to Gateway in order to preserve Gateway as an entity in terms of their operations. Relative to our operations, we also are a private business. I will tell you this, we're in that regard. Dan Gilbert is someone who has invested significantly in an effort, speaking strictly from a Cavaliers perspective, to try to bring the most competitive team and a championship caliber team to Cleveland. So I think I'm just saying this in terms of I think we have someone who's really has the best interest of the community at heart and is doing whatever he can in terms of whether it be facilities. And I would encourage you to go to Cleveland Clinic Courts if you want to see the type of player development facilities which are privately funded, to be able to see the type of platform for enabling for that, or relative to the investments in the arena and the efforts of, we have a tremendous group of team members in trying to make the Q one of the most active buildings in the country, if not, internationally, in terms of event activity. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I would say by any standard relative to a business, any profit that we make is relatively a small fraction of what our overall investment is, and that's not really what, in terms of driving our ownership, it's in terms of how do we, create a successful enterprise that's additive to the city and to the county and to the state of Ohio.
Okay, I'm not going to belabor that one. Indians, Mr. Dennis. I just wrote down first name. Sorry about that. You stated that out of the full-time, part-time employees, there were 61% of employees that work in our districts, and you had that on the slide 1 through 11. Is there any way that you could provide a list of where those employees are dot chart or whatever, a visual of where those employees work and representative to the county?
Yes, we can bring them back to you Thursday.
Okay.
And we'll break them out for all of you.
Okay. I would like that. And
I think
what
you're in third
expectation?
position. I think you're in third position.
I'm in third position? Okay. Well, what expectations do you have out of the $30 million in gifts and giving, and I believe this was the Cavs, that would be my last round of questions. Total of $30 million in gifts and givings, what was the time span for this charitable giving? Does anybody know what that was?
That's since the opening of the queue in 1994.
Thank you. I'll pass.
Mr. Wright?
Thank you. That last question was one of mine, so thank you, Ms. Conwell. But I had some questions on how things are currently being done. I haven't heard anyone speak to how money is currently being spent. And from my understanding, from what I heard today, there have been no capital, as far as Gateway is concerned, there's been no capital repairs done to date that meet that $500,000 threshold.
Madam President, to the councilman, that is correct.
And all of the expenses for Gateway so far have been covered via the rents from the Indians and the Cavs.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And so the money that's currently coming in from the sin tax, is that only being used to pay down the debt on the construction cost of the facilities?
The let's look at each one of the two respective levies of the sin tax. The first, 1990 to 2005. That was used to fund the original construction cost. Probably about 35 million or so in cash receipts was invested directly in the original construction of the Gateway project. There was probably about 4 million on balance that was after construction that was sent to the county to fund debt service on the arena bonds. All of the rest of the original levy of the sin tax between 1990 and 2005 paid for the principal and interest on bonds that were used to fund mostly, almost exclusively, the baseball facility.
Okay. So we're currently collecting about a little over $13 million a year?
That's correct. And the current levy is still being used, well, the first 87 million of that amount, this is the 2005 through current.
Right.
The first 87 million was used to fund bond debt service payments of the city. Actually, to be precise, about the first 2.6 million that was collected was moved from the city to the county to fund certain costs of the Gateway facilities. The next 87 million was provided to the city for bond debt service. Next 29 million, which is nearly complete, moved to the city for the capital repair escrow. And then amounts generated above 116 million from the extended tax, and there should be some, will come to the county. That has not started yet, but I would expect that to happen.
So currently, all the money's being spent.
All the money's being spent. The current money is being provided to the city for the Browns facility, either for initial construction or capital repair. There has not been any sin tax money utilized for the Gateway facilities since 2005.
Thank you. I just had are there repairs, and this is staying on Gateway, are there capital needs that are not being addressed because a team hasn't made a request? Would Gateway move in advance of a team actually requesting something if there was some type of major capital need that?
Councilman Rogers, to date, all of the capital repairs that have been executed meet at least our internal definition of primary capital repairs, less than 500,000. Responsibility of the respective teams to fund those through their rent payments to Gateway.
I understand that. I'm just wondering, it seems a little backwards to me that the owner of the property would wait until something was requested before you would move on a major capital repair or replacement?
Councilman Rogers, we do employ an engineering consultant, and Gateway's staff sees it as a primary responsibility of Gateway to monitor, and we're in each of these buildings every day. So far, it's been our determination that a capital repair that meets the definition of major capital repair has not come across our desk. We do expect it, however.
And this will be my last question for this round, I guess. And I think Mr. Sharon had asked this, but of the repairs that were listed on the presentation, we've seen, in the way that they were presented was over a 10-year time frame, yet the tax is over 20 years. Is the intent that all of those projects would be completed within the 10-year time frame or before?
Councilman Rogers, my expectation, based on the presentation of each of the tenants, is that the tenants have a general perspective provided in their building assessments that those repairs would take place at some point during the first 10 years. Certainly possible that some of it may fall over into year 11 or 12, but I think it would be the expectation of each of the tenants through their building assessment, which are preliminary, I understand, at least from the Cavaliers' perspective, that those repairs would take place during the first 10 years.
Last one, I'm sorry. So from the repairs, from the list that was provided, and I understand that this was very rough and these are basic estimates, but on the high end of the estimates, we're looking at $215 million, and we're anticipating collecting $260+ million
over 20 years.
Over 20 years. Is there any? What are we looking at with that $45 million, I guess, surplus?
Well, I think where you're going is that there would be a deficit over the time frame. Instead, if and I don't know whether I'll get these numbers right, but let's just say for the sake of argument that the Indians' number is the midpoint of their range, which would be $65 million over 10 years. The Cavaliers' number, I'm sorry, I think that, yeah, $65 million. The Cavs' number is 60, and the Browns is 25. That would suggest that there's actually a deficit. Now, those are 10-year numbers. And over 10 years, the tax would generate, if it continues to generate roughly $13 million a year, which it has generated over recent years, that would be $130 million over 10 years. So the requests outweigh the expected receipts during the first 10-year period, which is precisely why Gateway's board determined in 2012 that we needed to put a process in place to analyze each and every request, prioritize it, and then bring it to the county and the city respectively for consideration. We're going to need to analyze carefully these respective requests before we present them to you, because I would expect the requests to exceed the availability of tax revenue.
So the intent, if this were to go to the voters and the voters were to pass it, is that we wouldn't follow the model that was done before, where you would bond out the money and collect it all up front and then repay bondholders, or?
Councilman Rogers, I would expect that there would be some some ability to bond out the receipts to fund repairs, but that does not mean that each and every request would not go through our process.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Mr. Germana?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Of course, the primary purpose of this county council is to let the people decide on this. What I'm wondering in particular is why we're doing it in the primary is the first part of that, and the second part is in the previous two elections, was it done in the general election? I don't know who could answer. The first one is
I'll give you my best. I think I'm accurate on that. I think the first time we went to the voters in 1990, it was in May. And the second time, I believe it was a general election. Councilman Brady might know differently.
I'm sorry, it's just that I asked this question to my colleague.
Yes.
Because I couldn't remember the second one. I thought it was a general election, and I'm told it was actually a special election.
One of the presentations, they said August.
Well, as I recall, I think it took place, I think Ken knows for sure, I think it took place after a decision was made relative to one of our teams, and that was the fall.
Through the council president to Councilman Germana and to Councilman Miller, my recollection is that the original sin tax was expiring in 2005. The city of Cleveland, under Mayor White, was putting together in the summer of 1995 a financing package for Cleveland Browns Stadium. The extension of the sin tax was a key part of that plan, but we, the city of Cleveland, needed to go to the Ohio State Legislature to get the authority to have the tax put before the voters in November. The vote did take place in November of 1995, and I believe that the state legislature allowed the county commissioners to set it for November, and they acted in that regard. I'm not certain about that, but I do know that we needed to go to the state legislature to get the authority to put the extension from 2005 to 2015 on the ballot, and that ballot issue was voted on, I believe, November 5th or 6th, the day after Art Modell announced the Browns were moving to Baltimore.
Just, again, I think Ken's correct. Our numbers on one of the slides, it was May 8th, 1990 and November 7th, 1995.
Point is, as smart as Dale Miller is, he's not always right.
Usually he is, but. And then the issue of.
why are we doing it in the primary?
Well, as you know, has been referenced, this is about to expire. So we want to take advantage of the primary and get to it. We don't have much time left.
It's expiring in 2015.
Yes.
I just was wondering if there was any
Well, right
reasons for doing it
now,
in
and
the
unless
primary.
you guys know something I don't know, there may not be a May vote next year. It's an odd-numbered election year. There isn't necessarily, and it would cost extra to possibly put this before the voters next May. And I think the estimates for a countywide ballot these days is about $4 million. So we really only have two opportunities between now and the expiration of the tax. And that's why we're going in May.
Okay, so it's because of the two opportunities.
Right.
May and then November.
Right.
Okay,
Is that good?
that answers, thank you.
Yep.
Now, the next part of this was, or next question I have is, we heard from Gateway that Gateway does pay property taxes. I didn't hear anything about the Cleveland Browns Stadium. Is there property taxes involved on the illuminating First Energy Stadium?
Through the council president to Councilman Germana, there are property taxes on the land for First Energy Stadium, which the city of Cleveland pays. Those were approximately $700,000 last year. The Browns Stadium that is constructed on the land does not pay taxes, so neither the city nor the Browns paid real property taxes on the building itself. The taxes were on the land, not the building. And that was by state law that provided that.
We heard about the leases, that the Indians' lease expires in 2023 and the Cavs 2027. What's the situation with the Browns and this stadium?
The Browns lease expires in 2029. And recall from my previous testimony that we did a capital repair audit for a 10-year period, which carried between 2014 and 2024. We obviously have the last 5 years of the lease that we will have some responsibilities. We're just not able to quantify those before you today.
Okay, and then I asked a question of staff earlier, and I don't know who, it's probably was not going to go to you, but it's the question of where does the renewal of the sin tax go? And I understand that it comes to the county after a certain time period. Can you just clarify?
Well,
expound on what?
I will answer that question, and Mr. Oftermatt can clarify if I get this wrong. But the closing documents for the Cleveland Browns football stadium provided that with respect to the sin tax extension from 2005 through 2015, that other than the $2.6 million that Mr. Oftermatt described, the first $87 million of those proceeds went towards the debt service for the stadium. We reached that $87 million mark sometime in, I believe it was 2012. The closing documents provided that the next $29 million go to the city of Cleveland for a capital repair fund. And we are in the process of continuing to collect that $29 million. And as Mr. Oftermatt said, we will get to the point either later this year or early 2015 where we hit that $29 million number, and then the funds stop going to the city of Cleveland and they come back to Cuyahoga County to be applied for sports facility expenses. Did I get that right?
Absolutely correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Greenspan, and then Mr. Jones and Mr. Gallagher. We do have another round on Tuesday, so we'd probably like to, Thursday rather, probably like to wrap up by 6:15 or so.
Sure. Great. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Gallagher says he'll wait till Thursday.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President. One of the big things that we hear is, and Mr. Schron hit on the head, is we fully understand two things. Number one, the use of proceeds, and we did get some numbers, and we got some activities without numbers. And what I'd like maybe Mr. Roman to head up that effort of consolidating, not to volunteer GCP or probably Marty McGann, but that there be a consolidated report with the detailed items from all three facilities in one document with the costs associated with it. Obviously, there was an opportunity to present that information in total, but not the details. So I believe to dovetail on Mr. Schron's request and to make it a little more specific that we fully understand each line item and the cost projected. And these are projected costs. We understand that. A question for Mr. Oftermatt, though, as it relates to the items at Progressive Field and the queue, do those items that you saw on the list, and you said you saw them for the first time, so obviously you haven't had a chance to study it, do those coincide with the reports that your engineers are seeing as far as the items in particular?
Madam President, to Councilman Greenspan, yes, with regard to the categories.
Right. So there's nothing on there that surprised you?
Nothing on there that surprised me.
Okay. And you know, dovetailing again on Mr. Rogers' comment, if the question I believe was answered regarding the capacity to bond, because obviously the revenue comes in a predictable stream over a period of time, but the expenses won't come through in that same predictable stream. So there is the ability to bond, and that would be the expectation of the project?
Could be. To the councilman, you know, I would expect, I don't know this, but just generally based on my history with the facilities and with the revenue stream, that there would be regular ongoing annual needs, and there may be some needs where the revenue stream would be better leveraged. There's a lot of history with the revenue stream. The original revenue stream was bonded in 1990 in 2 tranches, and for sake of clarity and as a point of information, the 2 tranches totaled about $100 million. The lion's share of those proceeds was used for the ballpark. But if that first, if the very first levy of the tax was able to be leveraged, I would expect this one to be.
And, okay, this report that I'm referencing, I believe it would be prudent for us to have it by Thursday instead of the day of the vote. So 48 hours would be great. There was a discussion, a comment regarding the scoreboards, and we know they make the headlines, you know, whether people, as far as a touching point. But I heard today that included in the contracts, scoreboards are the responsibility of the landlord. Is that correct?
Scoreboards have been the responsibility of the landlord from the very beginning, which is us.
Or Gateway. Right.
Yes, which is Gateway. Yes, it's not the county, it's Gateway.
Right.
From the very beginning. The leases as amended, though, in 2004 provides for the major capital versus primary capital differentiation. That did not take scoreboards off the list. I would expect there to be discussions regarding scoreboards.
So speaking of Progressive Field and the Q, have those teams, or have there been scoreboard modifications since these leases were in place?
To Councilman Greenspan, yes, in both cases.
Okay.
There have been scoreboard modifications. The Indians did major scoreboard repairs, and repairs were needed considerably after the 10-year anniversary of the scoreboard. It's outside scoreboard, et cetera. So the Indians did major replacement of their scoreboard in 2003, and I believe the Cavaliers have done a couple of different replacements of scoreboard components and the primary scoreboard itself.
And they did that because Gateway was not in a position financially to do that?
That's correct.
Okay. Are there any other major components like that the landlord is obligated to take care of?
Well, again, this would be, and as further refined by the primary capital versus major capital differentiation, any of the major building systems, security, electric, HVAC, chillers.
Things that were on their list?
Yes.
Okay. The other, I mentioned, you know, the use of proceeds obviously is a critical component. We hear that when we talk and receive phone calls from constituents all over the county. The other issue that comes up, and we touched on it, and I would imagine that should this be on the ballot, and should the voters address it, should the voters vote on it, in between those 2 points, the structure is going to have to be addressed. And I hope that is, I heard it's in the works. We're going to need to really step up that and answer those questions as to when the money comes in, how is it going to be appropriated, and who makes those decisions, because we have 2 I would argue, and not in putting it in sports context, but two competing entities for the same money, Gateway and the city, because the venues fall under two different umbrellas. Just want to make sure that up front, because as you know, you enter into contracts and agreements for two reasons: to outline the fundamental understanding of the relationship and to litigate. And we'd rather not get into the tail end. We'd rather have all those answers addressed up front. And so I would argue to whomever is going to begin that discussion begin sooner than later, so that
Couldn't
we don't
agree more.
so we don't run into a scenario. The last question I have is for Law Director regarding the language. I know Council President Conley and Council Vice President Brady discussed the genesis of how we got to where we are today. But as far as the language is concerned that's before us, we understand it came from the legislature. Mr. McClure, Madam President, if I could ask the question, how much flexibility is there, and where's the flexibility in the language that's been presented by the state?
Sure,
And that's,
and to properly understand, our charter gave the county home rule authority, the broadest, absolutist home rule authority, except in one area, which is taxation. And in the area of taxation, it expressly provides that the county shall have power to levy only those taxes that counties are by general law authorized to levy. So when it comes to taxes, our home rule goes out the door. We're completely tied to what the state does. In this situation, you have the law that was passed by the Ohio legislature, both houses. It passed the Ohio House, the Ohio Senate, and signed by the governor into law that authorizes this tax to go through, and then it comes to the county council as the taxing authority under the charter to submit it to the voters for the voters' consideration. In that legislation that came from the state, the exact language of the ballot is provided and what you can tax and how you can provide it. So the duration is expressly provided for. It can be up to a maximum of 20 years. The rates are provided for in the Ohio Revised Code up to the rates that are provided in the resolution. And the one caveat that you have is the entire process has to be completed from one to finish, including adoption by the voters by September 1, 2015. If you miss that deadline, your opportunity goes out. So what we tax and the rates and everything is provided by the Ohio Revised Code. The Ohio Revised Code provides the max, which happen to be the current existing taxation rate for what we're taxing.
okay, great, thank you.
Very quickly, we're going to wind up, going to wrap up.
Law Director, on that point, when you say September 1st, 2015, if it goes back down there, we lose our authority. But wouldn't in turn, if it did go that process and went back, they'd have to still send it back to us?
I'm not sure I'm following. Go ahead, ask the question again. I'm not sure I fully understood it.
The information that you just shared for Greenspan's question, if you're talking about the legislation going back, if we don't act on it in this primary election and it goes back, you mentioned the September 1st deadline. If it goes back downstate, we missed the deadline or whatever, and we send it back, wouldn't it eventually come back to us anyway?
It'll completely depend on the state legislature, what they choose to do, but.
It doesn't go back, they have to start over again,
but-
state legislature.
I mean, we
They
can't
still
guarantee.
have to send it back to us once they wouldn't.
Or boy.
No, it's
done.
over. We have no right to place this on the ballot
We're done.
past September 1, 2015, unless the state reauthorizes us to do that. And actually, to
unless
understand
they
the
do.
kind of taxation that we're even talking about, this is not taxation that comes even directly to the county. This is taxation that is collected by the State Department of Taxation, and then they send it to us, and then we in turn send it to them. So this is a state process. We're the vehicle through which we implement it.
All right, and we're going to wrap up with Mr. Jones. Mr. Gallagher has a question. He says he'll wait till Thursday, and so this information can kind of sink in, and we can come back on Thursday. So, Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just ask one question. One reason for opposition that I've heard throughout the community has been the lack of material. The jobs just did not materialize. We heard that here in the public comments today. Back in 1990, Now, back in 1990, I was still in school. I was a young man, still in school. The three owners of the teams were different, so we have an entirely different cast of players here today. But it is something that is important to the community, and they may not look at it in that same context. And that's why I hear the question, and many of us hear that question again and again. What I'd like to know today is there anyone here, and I open this up to everyone to add their comments, but is there anyone here today who can take us back to 1990 and give us a sense as to why what promises made did not materialize, and what could we learn from it that things might be different this time?
Thank you for the question. I'll introduce him if the council will entertain an additional speaker. I think Mr. Yablonsky was scheduled to speak. I think he was the person you indicated that would speak later, but I'll give you my perspective. When in 1990, actually in 1989, 88, when the property was being purchased for Gateway, the initial idea was that a lot more land would be purchased in and around Prospect, in and around the Huron Triangle, things that you're starting to see develop now, like East 4th Street. But Gateway did not have the funds at that time to buy that property. And so some of the related ancillary development for new office buildings that were projected did not occur because the property was not purchased. But I think if you would entertain Tom Yablonsky, who not only works at Downtown Cleveland Alliance, but has been the director of the historic Gateway neighborhood for 100 years, I think he can give you a really cool, accurate, and honest perspective for what's happened to that neighborhood. I think Councilman Jones will answer some of your questions, but I also think it's the kind of information you really need to hear. And he was going to speak at the end during the public session anyway, so if you'd entertain him now, I think it could kill two birds with one stone.
Come on down.
More than 3 minutes.
Madam President, to the council. Yes, I think what was...
Give us your name, please.
Tom Yablonsky. I'm the Executive Director of the Historic Gateway Neighborhood Corporation. We are the CDC for the area adjacent to Gateway Sports Complex. It's the land adjacent. And we grew out of two earlier efforts. There was an East 4th Local Development Corporation that was formed to candidly save East 4th Street. When this was passed, 4th Street was still almost proposed for demolition. And also the Prospect Avenue Merchants Association that existed. They merged to create a historic gateway. And although, as Mr. Roman stated, there was an envisioning of there being some office development nearby, we actually have achieved a great amount as a community. And I think some of the political commentary over time that Gateway didn't meet its promise, I actually think is very inaccurate. Because the reality is, in pure numbers, since that complex has been built, we've attracted about $600 million of adjacent investment. And that investment ended up being things we didn't anticipate. We had earlier reinvestment in downtown to create a loft residential district in the warehouse district. When Gateway was built, if you go back and check, nobody thought a residential neighborhood would emerge around the sports complex, but one did. And it's the second largest one downtown. It now is 18 residential buildings. It's over 2,000 people live in that neighborhood. The other thing that was not envisioned was a hotel district. We now have 5 hotels in that immediate area. We have 4 other ones under construction to respond not only to Gateway, but now what's happened with the investment in the Global Health Center and some of the other things. So those two things combined. And in addition, if you go back and check, when Gateway was first envisioned, we actually only had 6 fully operating breakfast, lunch, dinner restaurants. Over time, restaurants, as you know, do come and go, but we can quantify there's 45 today active restaurants. So there's a tremendous amount of where it did deliver in terms of number of jobs. There was a study done of that, of the original promise by Cleveland State University about 15 years after it opened, and they quantified 12,000 jobs. And that's in addition to the construction jobs. So the reality is a very good number. It's not exactly what was projected, but it is an area that's probably the largest private investment in downtown, and Gateway generated that. And we're using that investment to still win competitively a number of funds. That development, as Joe said, we couldn't buy the land, so we took on another strategy. We created historic districts nearby. There are 3 National Register historic districts adjacent to Gateway, and catalyzing off that movement, We have, since the state enacted the state historic tax credit in 2006, this part of downtown, the Gateway District, if it was its own city, it would rank second in the state in the amount of state credits awarded to any one particular area. We've won 14 credits to that area. This last round, we just won another downtown Cleveland, and 30 million given out statewide. We won 10 million to downtown. So by building Gateway, we created a context for really creating a unique place. As I said, 4th Street was proposed for demolition. You may not remember that, but it was. And the effort of passing that act, getting the street to be designated, ultimately over time, incrementally, generated a lot of development. And actually, Historic Gateway, my organization, predating your operation for the earlier county government, we were the ones that applied for the state credits for the Rotunda and the 1010 building. We had no idea what was going to happen to those buildings. But by utilizing those tools, now you're generating adjacent to your new headquarters, the other largest private investment. So I think it's collaborative with Gateway. Historic Gateway Neighborhood's been able to do those things. So I really encourage you to maintain these assets, continue the community development to be built, and the real number is $600 million of development.
Okay, Mr. Gallagher is going to get a question. He's going to hold that until Thursday. At this time, I'm going to refer this matter back to the Committee of the Whole, and we'll be back on Thursday at 2 o'clock? At 2 o'clock. And is there any miscellaneous business? Any public comment unrelated to the agenda? Yes. Yes, these presenters will be back when, I assume, on Thursday.
Can we get copies of the slides that were presented?
Yeah.
Mr. Schron, they were already forwarded to each of you.
Okay. All right, if nothing else, we stand adjourned.